Hi guys, we've got another baking video here, and we all know that bread is a staple of the diet of most countries in the world, and you can go out and buy all manner of bread, but we all know, or should know, that homemade bread is far better than any batch produced stuff that you buy from a supermarket, with the exception of course from specialist bakeries that do bits and pieces. But one of the things that few people know is how incredibly easy it is to make bread, and one of the things I love about it is that you can spice it up a little bit. You can add cheese, you can fry some onions and add those to make a savoury bread. You can add fruit to it, you can do all manner of things. And on that theme, we're going to make a loaf today, and it's going to be a Christmas themed loaf. And we're going to add some sweetened dried cranberries to the dough, and that will be the last thing we do before it goes in for the second proofing before the bake. So to begin with, you need yourself a large mixing bowl and 500 grams of flour. Now I'm going to use 350 grams of strong white bread flour and 150 grams of wholemeal bread flour. Now I do like wholemeal bread, but wholemeal flour on its own does not give a good rise. It doesn't rise anywhere near as well as white bread flour does. And also, contrary to popular belief, you can, if you don't have bread flour for any reason, you can actually use plain flour. It's just that the gluten is not as strong in plain flour, and to get things activated and moving, you really need to use knead it more. So rather than about the 10 minutes, which is average, you maybe need to knead it for about 15 minutes or so, but you can tell when the dough sort of comes together and looks right. So you can actually use plain flour if you're ever in a position where you've run out of bread flour and you need to top up, or you just don't have bread flour but you need to make a loaf. So do bear that in mind. And then I'm going to add a teaspoon of sugar. This is to help activate the yeast. And then 2 teaspoons of easy bake yeast. This is exactly the same stuff as you get in the packets, and 2 just slightly under level teaspoons is equivalent to the 7 grams you would get in one of those packets. So you can use 1 packet, that works just fine. I'm going to add a pinch of salt, and then we're going to give that a stir together using a fork. You can use a knife or a whisk or anything that takes your fancy, a wooden spoon or what have you. Fork's just handy. So give that a good stir together, and I'm going to make a well in the middle of that. And into that I'm going to pour, while I stir, 300 millilitres of tepid water. I'm going to start pouring the water into the middle and just start stirring that in. Now I've actually got a little bit more than 300 millilitres in here, so I am going to stop short, but I've got a little bit extra just in case I need to add any extra, because sometimes, depending on the temperature in your kitchen, on the climate, the time of year, the humidity, etc., you sometimes need a little less, sometimes need a little more. This is kind of a go by feel thing. And after you've made the bread a few times, you kind of get a feel for it. Initially, you're looking for the dough to be a bit of a sticky lump, which doesn't look like it's looks like it's overwatered, but it will be surprising how it all comes together. A little bit more in there. It's looking good. So at this point, I'll scrape off the dough from the fork, and I'm going to start using my hand. Of course, as with anything baking wise that you get your hands into, make sure your hands are nice and clean, give them a wash beforehand. And obviously don't go petting the dog and then dive into your bowl and start making bread. So who knows what you might find in there. So you'll see how that's coming together quite nicely. So I'm just giving that a general knead together to begin with, just to make sure I combine everything that's in this bowl. Lovely. Put that water to the side for a moment, just in case I do need to add more. And I'm going to take some of this remaining flour and just give the flour and the work surface a bit of a dust. And I'm going to move some of these bits and pieces. So move the bowl out of the way, and we'll need that momentarily though. So what I'm going to do now is knead, and the method of kneading is fold back and push with the heel, fold back and push with the heel, fold back, push with the heel, fold back, push with the heel, and you keep doing that as you're turning it round. Roll the dough round, make sure you give it a really good sort of mix up, and you just roll back and push with the heel. You can be really tough and aggressive with this kneading, and you don't have to be gentle with it at all, which is great for people like me who are hopeless at making pastry, which is why I use the mixer to make my pastry. But for bread dough, it doesn't matter if you're heavy-handed with it, so go ahead and do this, and you need to do this for about 10 minutes. So obviously I'm not going to show you 10 minutes of me doing that, so we'll cut back in 10 minutes time when I'm done with the kneading, and we'll look at the next step. 10 minutes has passed, and hopefully you can see how this has actually come together and is looking much more like a solid consistent lump. And if I just roll that into a sort of rough loaf shape, you can see how that makes a really nice smooth lumpy a smooth lump of dough. So what you do when you're at this stage is you knead it round into a ball like so, folding the edges in, pinch the edges in. There you go, shape that into a ball. Take your bowl that you mixed your ingredients in, a drop of olive oil, or a bit of butter would do the job. Anything essentially. This is just to help it so it doesn't stick when you need to take it out after the first proofing. Just give that a good wipe around inside the bowl like so, and then take your dough and just plop that in the bottom. And the next thing we need is some cling film. I'm going to cover this up and leave it to for the first proofing, which you can do in a warm place, which will take an hour or two, until it's about doubled in size. So if you have an airing cupboard or somewhere warm, you can do that. My preferred method, however, is to allow it to proof in the cold. So if your kitchen's fairly cold, you can just leave it on the kitchen side, as I tend to do, because I don't have individual heating in my kitchen, so it tends to be cooler than the rest of the house. If your kitchen is quite warm, however, then you can pop it in your fridge, and you'll need to leave it for several hours, and in some cases overnight. And what you're waiting for is the dough to rise until it's at least doubled in size. Basically the yeast will start activating, creating gases and bubbles, and the dough will expand. This is called the first proofing, at which point we'll knock it back, flatten it out, we'll add the cranberries, and then we'll form it into a loaf shape, and we'll go ahead and bake it. So this is going to be left for a good few hours, possibly overnight, and we'll be back in a few hours time when that's gone through the first proofing stage. So at this point, this is about 5 hours of sitting there proofing for the first proof. And as you can see, it's risen considerably. We'll take away the cling film. And having washed my hands, I'm just going to pull that out of the bowl, put the bowl aside. And just going to knock that back and knock the air out of this. So you're literally just kneading this 4 or 5 times. And then at this point, because I'm going to add some fruit to it, we do this before the second proofing. So what I'm going to do is flatten the dough out about that much. Now we're going to get a rolling pin and I'm going to roll the dough. Ordinarily you wouldn't do this if you're just making a straight loaf, but I've found the easiest way to add fruit or any extra bits, cheese or whatever it might be, to a loaf is this way that I'm just going to show you right now. So roll that out so it's about 1/2 inch thick and about the width of your bread pan. And then at this point, take the fruit of choice, in this case cranberries, and sprinkle it liberally all over the surface. As I say, this same would apply if this were cheese or anything else. And the versatility of bread, because you can put savoury things or sweet things in it, you've really got a lot of choice and a lot of variety. You can just sort of go ahead and experiment and try all sorts of things, because the bread, of course, itself is so cheap to make. So and this one just occurred to me earlier. I've never actually used cranberries before, but I do love cranberries. I could quite happily sit and munch on these all day long. So a liberal covering of cranberries, leaving a few to snack on. And then if you take a water mister, a spray bottle, and mist coat that liberally with water and begin to roll up the dough like a Swiss roll. The water helps the dough stick together. Without that, what I've discovered is it can have a tendency to separate. The layers will actually separate. When you get to the end, what you need to do is pinch the end layers together like so. If it doesn't want to comply, give it another squirt of water to help encourage it. That bit right there really doesn't want to, but it will give in. And then taking the seamed edge, so it's at the bottom, pat that into a loaf kind of shape and pop that into your loaf pan like so. And we'll just give that a quick wipe. Set that in your loaf pan like so, and just take a tea towel, clean tea towel, and just throw that over there, and then we'll leave that for another hour or two for the second proofing, and we're looking for that to rise until it's at least double in size, at which point we pop it into a preheated oven at 230 degrees. A few hours later, there's a couple of hours, and well, actually about 2.5 hours, you can see the dough has risen really nicely for a second proofing, and I'm just preheating the oven right at this moment, and as soon as the oven's preheated, I'm going to use the water mister to wet, to soak the surface of the bread dough, and that will, what that does is it gives the dough a really crisp crust, a really nice crisp crust. And you don't actually have to use a bread pan, incidentally. You can just shape the dough and put it on a flat pan and get even more of a crust all over. But that gives it a nice crust. So you need to bake it in 220-230 degrees C in the oven for 15 minutes, and then at the 15-minute point you need to spin it around just to make sure that it browns evenly. This is especially important in a non-fan assisted electric oven, because the heat doesn't tend to go around evenly, so you need to spin it around, because you'll find that it will brown on the back more so than on the front. Not quite so important in a fan assisted oven, but I do still find that it makes a difference as well. So as soon as the oven's preheated, this is going to go into the oven for 30 minutes. So mist that liberally, and then into the oven it goes. So there's the bread out of the oven, looking very nice all around. A little bit dark on the back, but not bad. And very nicely risen, as you can see. And to test it, is the bit where you kind of need asbestos hand a little, but what you're looking for is a nice hollow sound when you tap it, which we've got there. So what we need to do now is leave that on the rack to cool. And it's very important, as tempting as it is, to cut into it straight away while it's toasty warm, and it is, because you know I've done that myself. It's important that you leave it for at least an hour, because at this point it's actually still cooking internally, and if you cut it now, it will allow all that built-in, trapped-in steam and heat to escape, and it won't be as nice. It'll still be nice, still be edible, but leave it for at least an hour, and it will be absolutely incredible. So we'll come back once that's cooled down. I just wanted to get this little bit here. I don't know if you can actually hear it, but this is one of my favourite bits about baking bread, is when it's just out of the oven and sat on the cooling rack. You can hear it crackling as the crust is cracking, as it's contracting, as in cooling down. So here we've got the loaf now cooled down, and just cut a slice off that. Nice crunchy crust, as you can hear. It's beautiful, and the cranberries, I'll maybe put a few more in, but there should be more as you go through. But I'm going to try a sample of that now. But that's a lovely soft loaf with a nice crispy crust, and interspersed with cranberries, perfect for your turkey sandwich on Boxing Day. So hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.